Greetings, fellow thinkers and drinkers, and in this case, once again, Black Sabbath fans. Now, about 6 months ago, I recorded a video discussing the then imminent release of Black Sabbath's the legendary Lost Earth tapes. Seem to recall I expressed a good deal of enthusiasm and curiosity, certainly, about what we may expect. I also recall discussing at some length the legal status of this release. Almost to the point who exactly owned the rights to it. Now, at the time, it seemed pretty much clear-cut case that ex-manager Jim Simpson owned the rights to these particular recordings. While even at the time, a certain Mrs. Osborne was doing her level best to ensure that the album never saw the light of day. Okay, fast forward 6 months, and surprise, surprise, there is still no actual physical release of this album. Now, without belaboring the point, it's fairly obvious now that Mrs. Osborne has been considerably more effective in her obstruction than I had originally assumed possible. Having said that, there has been a download version available for a while now, which is currently circulating. I'm not too sure of its provenance, or whence it came. Was it officially released digitally? I'm not totally sure, or did it somehow leak? Well, anyway, it is available. So, out of equal parts curiosity and frustration, as well as perhaps as a modest act of defiance against Mrs. Osborne's business practices, I have acquired a copy. Should this material, however, ever receive a legitimate release, I will gladly buy it. Given current state of affairs, I'm not exactly holding my breath. However, in the meantime, I have my acquired copy, though my conscience remains entirely clear. So, okay, and admittedly, I have been slightly slow off the mark on this one. As I said, it has been out for a while now. Just before I start, again, so this is not an official release. I just have the files downloaded, so there is no booklet, no information, nothing like that. So, at least as far as I understand it, it is unclear as to where and when these individual tracks were actually recorded, etc., etc. Okay, enough of that. Now, the album, I suppose one can refer to it as, opens with blue suede shoes. Now, is this the version we are already familiar with? By that I mean the one that was on the DVD, came out 20 years ago now. That is from the Beat Club in Germany, I believe. Now, on this version, this is presumably a live recording, as Osborne takes some time to actually introduce the song. Though in terms of performance, I have to say it sounds very similar to the Beat Club version, or at least the version we are familiar with. I have not, admittedly, done a back-to-back comparison, but if there are differences, they are slight, inconsequential even. Like I say, I may be wrong in that, but it's certainly, to me, it sounds very familiar. Point being, however, be there slight differences or not, this is not really something with which we were not already familiar, is it? And again, okay, as a result, I'm not going to say too much about it, other than, I suppose instrumentally at least, it captures the band's roots, well before, what they were playing in their formative bar band days, before they developed their own sound, their own material, their own vision. And musically, yes, they play well. It's got a certain energy to it, very much so. Chemistry between the three players, I think, is established on that. It's not the worst bar band version of a rock and roll classic you'll ever hear. Oh, if I'm being honest, I have never been particularly keen on Osborne's vocals on this song, which to me they seem somehow detached from the track itself, sort of hovering above it almost, rather than locking into it. There is little of the swagger, shall we say, or swing, or playful menace even, or aggression that defines the original. It's replaced in this case by a stiff, I was about to say uncertain, but I don't know if that holds water really, but still almost a perfunctory delivery. I'm not that keen on it. Never have been. And again, let's say this is nothing particularly new, is it? Its inclusion in here, filling up space, again, certainly has no claims to being, a release for the first time, really, does it? Even if it is a slightly different version from the one on the DVD, or the one we've been familiar with all these years. Okay, we move on. The second number, Evening. It's another blues staple, isn't it? But this is rendered with much more swagger and identity, I have to say. Here you can hear it. The band is beginning to stretch out beyond pure imitation of a cover song, as was the case, shall we say, on Blue Suede Shoes. The rhythm section feels a lot tighter. Certainly glimpses of a heavier attack instrumentally that would soon define their sound. And even Osborne sounds more confident on his delivery of this than he did on Blue Suede Shoes. Yes, instrumentally it is very much Black Sabbath. They are, Iommi in particular, but the other two as well, are just such distinctive players. You can tell who it is. It is that simple. But they are playing very, very well on this, given their tender years. But this is not as identifiable as they are. This is not musically identifiable as Black Sabbath. They're playing very much more like a jazz combo here. They're playing well, and it's interesting because of that. We're even treated to a flute solo. Wasn't expecting that, but I have to say in context it fits in perfectly well. And listening to this, knowing what we know now, one can clearly discern the genesis, I think, of what was to come. But they have not quite found their own voices yet. And obviously, I mean, it's of great historical interest, isn't it? But above its historical interest, it's fundamentally, it's a damn fine performance, I think. And it's enlivened by conviction, as opposed to competence. No, obviously the competence there, but you can feel they're enjoying this. Okay, Wee Baby. Where did they get them? Presumably, yeah, a working title. Now this goes more back to the blues. Again, they were probably playing since their inception. But I have to say, again, it's played with a kind of infectious energy. One doesn't always associate with the blues, does it? What? Does one not? But because of its blues leanings and blues roots, it has a much more familiar structure, rhythm, and tempo to it. And yeah, there are some imperfections here. There are some rough edges, definitely. But again, this is just indicative of a young band finding their feet, developing. Well, so maybe even it's rough quality, perhaps even a slightly unrehearsed quality, part of its charm. I think it's an instrumental piece, and their music's evolving here. And because of that, it maintains interest, does it not? I mean, we're not looking at a polished, finished product here. But no, I mean, certainly never heard this before, and obviously interesting to listen to it. And it's well played. It's not just, oh no, this is of historical interest, we must be kind about it. No, it's well played. Okay, the fourth song is Untitled. And this really does feel almost like a doorway between eras. This is still very much rooted in the blues, but we are already nudging towards something darker and far more weighty. Although again, that just might be hindsight talking. knowing what we know now, if going back, if we could listen to this, could we have predicted what came? Possibly not. But again, this might be, again, tricks being played on one, since we know how the band would develop. But I do hear some proto-metal in some of the riffage going on here. And especially the way they're playing with and off each other seems to have gone up a level, gone up a notch, shall we say. There's more focus to it, more intent to it. And instrumentally, again, this is very, very impressive. Is this the first hint, recorded hint, that they were becoming more than a bar band? Okay, Free Man up next, and this is the only, so to say, complete song that we've never heard before. It's also the lengthiest piece, well, just about the lengthiest piece, isn't it, on the album, but very much. I think this is where you could hear the band's identity starting to coalesce. There's a certain looseness in the playing, to be sure, yes, but there's also a lot of ambition. And I've said in other contexts, ambition's fine as long as you have the talent to realize it, and it's obvious here that they have both. Osborne's vocals are also starting to take shape. This is listening to him sing here is much closer to his recorded performance on the debut than, let's say, we've heard thus far on the album, especially vis-a-vis Blue Suede Shoes, shall we say. Something about Geezer Butler's bass playing on this particular song, to me it has definite echoes of the bass lines he would later apply to not just the song Black Sabbath, but also Hand of Doom. It's not identical, but there are echoes of it. There's a similar feel to it, I think. Maybe, again, that just might be me. But certainly going through this release, this is the first time I think we really do hear the burgeoning Black Sabbath sound. Couple of reasons I say that. The material thus far, be it jazzy blues or whatever, has been relatively lively and upbeat and up-tempo. This is very slow and very deliberate, which is more what we would go on to associate with early Black Sabbath, is it not? And as such, I think, yes, it's probably the first time you could put your hand on your heart and say, yes, this is embryonic Black Sabbath. And again, as opposed to the material we've heard thus far on this release, here is the very first hint of Doom. So everything else, instrumentally, they've been very recognizable because of who they are, but this is the first hint of Doom. And so it's a long piece with a lot of interplay on it, a lot of jamming and noodling around. But again, I say, it's very impressive. Gets the feeling that had this song made the album, it would have been edited somehow. There's probably too much noodling, as was the case with Warning, but doubtless they did that to fill up space. But there's a really strong idea here, actually. At some point, you think if they'd taken to the studio, Roger Bain would have said, all right, guys, there's a 4 or 5 minute song in here, let's try and coax it out. But you really hear the early seeds of the heavy, brooding, doomy sound that would soon become the band's hallmark. And as a result of that, I find it's obviously it's formative, but I find it absolutely fascinating. Okay, then follows 2 versions of Song for Jim. Now, we've heard snippets of this in the past, have we not? Now, both of these takes are instrumental. The first is the guitar version, and it shows a band not necessarily jamming as such. It is a constructed piece, is it not? But it's a move back in time, one suspects, from Free Man, that this was composed earlier because it doesn't have any of that. It's still very recognizably, Iommi, Butler, and Ward, shall we say, but it has no hint of that doom that was prevalent even on Free Man, so one suspects these are earlier compositions. And there's a sense of the band playing for themselves here, stretching ideas, experimenting with feel, just jamming around, trying to develop. But it is more feel-based. I don't know if that's the right way of putting it, but it is a constructed piece here, which I suppose is a slight move away from what they were doing on a couple of the other things, which were very much, that jazz-blues combo effect on them. Although it's not a fully formed composition. And being an instrumental, one never knows. I mean, it's, the quality of the song often is determined by the quality of the top line, unless it is an out-and-out instrumental piece, where the top line is replaced, by instrumentation. But it's a fun listen, it really is. And there is a second version of the song, which is the flute version, which is about a minute or so longer, or roughly a minute longer. What are the fundamental differences? Well, the fundamental differences even are that Iommi replaces his guitar work on the previous version with flute playing. Now, I'll admit I am not really the best judge of what makes a good flautist, but to my untrained ear, this sounds perfectly competent, and it actually fits in rather well in a kind of surreal almost way. Must have been a hangover one expects from his his Jethro Tull period. The other noticeable difference in this song is that Bill Ward gets an extended workout in the middle, and listening to it for me, this comes across as a far better expression of his talents than did Rat Salad, which featured on the Paranoid album. Okay, there's a couple of oddities, sure, but they're both kind of endearing, I think. Both performances are loose, especially the flute version has an almost pastoral quality to it. It reminds one even that these were still young guys finding their way. They were not yet bound by the genre that they would effectively create. Okay, moving on. The last two tracks on the album are embryonic versions of songs we are already familiar with. Firstly, Wicked, which is a demo version, shall we say, of Wicked World, which made the US version of the debut, not the European version. But it was still familiar to most, even though they had not heard the US version of the album due to it being a staple of their early live show. I'm sure, listening to them back to back, there are a couple of differences, but they appear to, at least to my ears, to be rather slight and nuanced. In terms of difference, nothing really stands out. Yes, I suppose you could tell it is a different take, but that may just be the differences that naturally, the natural variation from take to take. It does sound similar enough to my ears to the recorded version, and as such, it makes it interesting, but not revelatory. And the last song is Warning, which does in fact clock in at 2 minutes longer than the album version. Now, the main difference, the most obvious difference to my ears is the opening, whereas on the album it opens with Iommi's acoustic picking. This opens with a band opening salvo, a nice heavy chord, bass and drum fills, and then proceeds into Iommi's acoustic picking. Additionally, this goes at a faster tempo than ultimately the song had on the debut album. For the rest, it would appear that the extended runtime is taken up with an extended instrumental section of which there were lots on this song. I have not done a forensic comparison, I have to admit, but after listening to them back to back a couple of times, that is my strong impression, that it's taken slightly quicker. There is the opening salvo, and there must be a couple of extra minutes of guitar solo jamming somewhere in the song. Well, it's slightly more interesting in that take than was the demo version of Wicked World, given I say an improved opening, does it? But it on the album it blended in from A Bitter Finger and Sleeping Village almost as a suite. So that's perhaps an unfair comment. Does it been taking at a slightly quicker tempo change it? Well, no. I mean, it's not exactly symptom of the universe tempo, but it is noticeably quicker. Difficult to say if it makes a difference. One is just so used to the album version. It certainly doesn't spoil it. But again, it remains interesting rather than revelatory. Okay. And that is that. It's quite a short release, which brings me to the most obvious question. What on earth happened to The Rebel? Surely that was recorded, whatever, around the same time. And one would have thought that also, fell under the auspices of Jim Simpson's ownership. I don't know. I've never heard anything as to why it is not included in this. But its omission does seem conspicuous to me. And obviously that leads on to a further point that, what other stuff may there be. But again, it's a rabbit hole we don't need to go down. The second more fundamental point is this material actually any good? And the answer is an unequivocal yes. It is genuinely fascinating to hear the band in their formative phase. Yet already, as I've said, sounding remarkably assured. The recording quality is fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's not a pristine production job, but for what it is, there's absolutely nothing to complain about. And again, I've said this, but I think it's worth repeating. It's striking to note just how instrumentally accomplished they already are. But the majority of the tracks on this album, I will exclude Blue Suede Shoes from this, is not just archival filler. It does have genuine interest. We are hearing stuff that we have not heard before. And it is possible from hearing that, to understand perhaps the genesis of the sound that they were ultimately going to achieve. Let me put that another way, shall we? This is something I will actively return to and listen to again, which is more than I can say for the so-called outtakes and alternative takes on some of the box set albums. I'm thinking particularly about the Volume 4 box set in that regard. Does this deserve an official release? Absolutely. Will it get one? Well, that remains an open question, does it not? We will have to wait and see. It would seem, as far as I know, I haven't heard anything about it. So whether it's tied up in a court case or something, or legal wrangling, I have absolutely no idea. There's been very little, as far as I'm aware, very little said about that. But one suspects one issue may be, had the Sabbath camp contemplated a box set release of the debut album, then this release may well have cleared the pitch there, at least in terms of previously unheard or unreleased material. Although there remains, does there not, The Rebel, whose absence from here I think is rather striking, and presumably they must have live recordings of the band as Black Sabbath from around this time. Must have live material in the vaults, one would have thought. And if it has put a spanner in the works to any plans Black Sabbath had for a debut album box set, then I say more power to Jim Simpson. But I have precisely zero sympathy for the Sabbath camp in this regard. I said before, and I will say again, I think we have generally been very ill-served by these box sets in the past. Well, there we have it. Finally got to hear it. And on that basis alone, I can absolutely recommend it without hesitation. If you're a fan of the band, you really need to listen to this. As said, I mean, if my conscience slumbers, if you have to get yourself an unofficial copy, then, well, maybe you just do. Maybe we just do. But on that note, please feel free to like, to share, to subscribe, all those good things, and most importantly, to comment. What do you think about it? I'd really like to hear. And on that note, I thank you very much for your indulgence. I wish you well. And until next time, ma chonquière.